Calling all seekers of magic within and without. Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. This is season 2, episode 12, and I'm your host, Dean Jones. This podcast is where we explore the intersection of witchcraft, self-discovery, and the power of community. Ever feel like life itself is a spell, a dance of connection waiting to get ignited? Today we meet Irisanya Moon, an author, witch, international teacher. You name it, Irisanya does it. For over 20 years, they've been weaving magic, guiding others on a path of personal and collective transformation. Irisanya is a prolific author from the Pagan Portals series, exploring goddesses like Aphrodite and the Norns, to Earth Spirit, a call to reconnect with the wilderness within. Irisanya's writing ignites the magic in anyone who picks it up. Let's not forget their recent poetry collection, Wrecked, The Insistence of Grief, a powerful exploration of vulnerability. I'll now take you to my fascinating conversation with Irisanya Moon. Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today I'm speaking with pagan author Irisanya Moon. Irisanya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. And just, for our listeners who may not be familiar with you yet, where are you from and where do you live now?
Yeah, who the heck is Irisanya Moon? First of all, my pronouns are she and they, and I originally grew up in the Midwest of the United States, so Michigan, Ohio, and now I am in California, and I live on the land of the Wapo, the Southern Pomo, and the Great Rancheria folks, and Coast Miwok, Santa Rosa, California. So it's about an hour north of San Francisco. And I've been out in California now. I was thinking about this, I guess almost 20 years now, which is frightening. So,
were you raised in any particular religion growing up?
Like so many pagans, at least that I've found, I was raised Roman Catholic. So I am a recovering Catholic, and I actually don't think it's the biggest leap from Catholicism to paganism. I think that it makes a lot of sense to me, at least. You got your candles and your incense and your deities and your liturgy and your all of that. I was really into Mary growing up. And so I even wanted to be a nun. So I think that all kind of worked out just in a different way.
I've talked to so many pagans who said almost exactly the same thing.
It's real.
It seems to be a continuing theme I've seen talking to older and younger. But I've heard it from a lot of boomer age pagans who basically said, they were Catholics who really worshiped Mary and really got into Mary. And then, it kind of resonated with them later on as a pagan.
Yeah, I had this really beautiful moment a few years ago. One of the members of our community died, and she was a Christian witch and like a universal Unitarian, can't remember what it's called, Unitarian minister. And at her funeral, she wanted to have people invoking Mary as part of the ritual. And so me and a friend of mine who also grew up Catholic, we went up there and said the Hail Mary because I still remember it. And it was just a really beautiful moment. And I think that there's something about Mary that is not only a movie, but also something that's really, the goddess inspiration, I think.
I feel like I have no problem with that, but I know some people do. Now it's weird because we will invoke deities from like anything, even non-deities. And yet when we come to Mary, we have an issue, I think, sometimes.
Or Jesus. Yes. Yeah. There's been a couple of witch camps in reclaiming that have been focused on Mary Magdalene. And invoking Jesus was always felt a little crunchy to some folks. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of religious trauma to be fair. And I think that part of at least my magic is rewriting stories away from the patriarchal grips. And so we can only do that by engaging with them, I think.
Yeah, I think that's very healthy. I like that. How did you come to paganism? At what point in your life did you discover it? Did it come up for you? Was it hard for you kind of like telling your family about it?
Yeah, so it's really interesting when I look back now. So I was Roman Catholic, and my parents sort of made me go to church, which is the easiest way to get me to never do the thing is to say that I have to do it. So as long as I lived in their house, I had to go to church. And so I wouldn't. And I would just go, back in the days, don't do this, kids. I would get intoxicated and not go to church. So, but eventually I got into more spiritual things, what I would say New Age, Reiki, and I was part of a Native American lodge for a little bit.
Oh,
because there
nice.
was a woman in Michigan who was tasked with white folks being a part of different practices. And that was really beautiful. But also at that time, there was the internet, and I started to learn about this thing called Wicca. And I decided that was probably better for me. So I sort of meandered into that and found myself in the arms of Scott Cunningham and Raymond Buckland, and, proverbially, and then eventually Starhawk. So for me, it really was a pretty easy movement through things, a few synchronicities here and there. Where I grew up in the Midwest, there were actually a lot of New Age stores and a lot of New Age groups. And there was also witchcraft, was pretty prominent in a few places. So it didn't feel weird. My parents only found out when I said I was getting hand-fested. And my mom was not happy to not do this in a church. And I said, well, don't come. And then she got over it. And what are you going to do? But she knew before she died, she knew like this name that I have now. She knew about my books. She knew what I did. And she was really proud of me. So
I like to ask this question to everybody because I think it's different for everybody. But like, you've been practicing for over 20 years.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What have you seen? What changes have been the most evident for you? And I think in the umbrella that we call paganism.
Oh, in paganism as a whole, or in my own practice? Both.
Either one, whatever you're more comfortable talking with.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that for me, when I first started out in paganism or witchcraft, I felt really internally focused. And so really singular and solitary in my practice. I had covens and stuff, but it was very singular and solitary. So it felt like it was just a practice of learning as much as I could, and someday it would make sense. And then as it's evolved into more of a community practice for me and a collaborative practice, it's still about me, but it's more also about the world and how do my actions impact other folks, or how could they? I mean, when I moved into reclaiming, the tagline is an eco-feminist tradition seeking to unify spirit and politics. And that to me was like, oh, this isn't just about navel gazing. This is about something bigger. And I feel like, though that's always kind of been a part of witchcraft, in some respects, I feel like that's bigger now. I think that there is more of an emphasis on how practices can be, without sounding too trite, world changing.
Yeah.
I think that that's true. I think there's more conversations about it. I don't think anybody gets it perfectly right, but I think that it's definitely more in the conversation.
As an author, witch, teacher, and poet, you wear many hats. How do these different aspects of your life inform and influence each other?
Yeah, I do a lot of things. It is partially I have a lot of Gemini on my chart, and I also have ADHD. So I think that's why I do a lot of right. I mean, who doesn't in this in traditions really? I think they're the weirdos, the ones that don't. Yeah. So I mean, I think that one of the things that it's with labels and things like that, it's easy to like kind of put them into buckets, but it's actually all these are verbs. Like it's just who I am. I kind of do. I am magic. I am a witch. I'm not doing witchcraft, although that also happens. So that informs what I write about. It also informs my teaching, and it also informs my poetry and how I see the world and how I see connections in the world. And also, I just think all of this is just part of expanding into my personal relationship with magic and my own personal empowerment. These are different avenues that I've always been a writer. I've always been a teacher in some respect, even though I fought against it forever.
Yeah.
So these I think are partially just kind of inherent, but also there are ways in which I can connect with folks expand my own practice and also expand into activism and other ways of being hopefully useful in the world.
Nice. I like that. Now, talking about your the aspect, the writer hat, so to speak, your Pagan Portal series delves into various deities and their significance. What sparked your interest in these specific figures, and what did you hope readers would gain from your work?
Yeah, I love the Pagan Portals series because it is just these little introductions into deities and also into reclaiming witchcraft, because I got to write about that too. So these deities, I actually do get to choose. I asked, like, can I write a book about Aphrodite? Can I write a book about Iris? And the way I choose them is that I usually have personal experiences or practices with them, or I really want to. So Aphrodite, for example, is the one I work with the most. And I was like, how can I bring forward some of my personal gnosis / exercises into the world? Iris, there are no books on her until I wrote one. So that was why I chose that one, because Iris is my namesake, but also she has a lot to offer. So I guess for me, the Pagan Portals really, I get to hopefully give enough information to inspire folks to sort of look deeper into this deity. I can't cover everything in those books at all. But at least these are starting points and really easy places of access. If there's anything I want to do, it's to demystify this idea of interacting with deity and sort of shake loose the whole idea of the patriarchal only one God sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of, like, maybe that's like the secret undertone of writing about deities so much, and writing a lot about relationship building with deities and thus also with humans.
To explore themes like well-being and practically pagan, why is it important for you to bridge the gap between magical practices and holistic well-being?
Yeah, that book was a really interesting book for me to write, an alternative guide to health and well-being. That's what it is. And so one of the things that is really important to me is this idea of I am divine too. So it's part of my thought process of the world. Like, if I'm divine, how do I care for that? I spent so much time, altars and books and stuff like that for that divine, but I'm divine too. So for me, this is about recognizing that there is no difference between me and divinity, me and the elements. And so how do I care for those? Instead of moving, so in that book, I talked a lot about self-care. I've evolved since then, and I've evolved it into, I'm calling it self-devotion. Because for me, that feels like a more important practice than it does, and not in a judgy way, but just it feels like you might, oh, this is not just something I buy. This is something I'm doing in service to myself, in service to my own divinity and this precious body that I get to have right now. So I think that we personally as humans need to focus on ourselves too, because there's a lot going on. And if we don't care for ourselves, we can't do all the things and show up in the ways that we want to.
It's funny, I talked with somebody about this yesterday in an interview, and I think it's something that we don't really cover enough, self-care and kind of working on yourself. And it's funny, like I myself don't like to always practice when I'm not feeling like my at my best.
Mhm.
And so I feel like but I think people don't really, I think it doesn't get covered, especially in early writings. People didn't cover it really much, but I think people are more careful with it now. Do you think it's just people's evolution over time, seeing their own practices and how they did things for better or worse, kind of looking at things? Do you have anything to say about that personally?
I think that that's definitely true. I mean, I hope that I always evolve in my practice. I don't ever want to be stuck in one place. I am a way different witch than I was in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think partially due to recognizing that I am a vessel for all of this. And I need to have without getting into good and bad, I want to have a strong vessel, and I want to have one that is able to emotionally regulate, one that is able to eat well, one that actually rests and doesn't buy into all the oppressive structures that are already trying to tell us to do all the things. and to just
Yeah.
wear ourselves down. So it's activism too. Like even in this, there's the activist part of it of like, no, the system says don't rest and says take on more than you can and don't worry about your body. Maybe we should not be following that guideline.
Well, yeah, I think like in the 90s, people would have just soldiered on and done stuff when they weren't right. And now I think you'll hear people say, I'm canceling this ritual because I don't, or I'm not coming to the ritual because I'm not in a good space. And people get it. I don't think they would have gotten it 20 years ago.
No, and I think that there's also some nuance in that, right? I think that there are also ways to practice magic where you're at versus trying to push yourself to be somewhere else. So maybe you could still do it from where you're at.
Yeah.
Instead of, trying to do the big dramatic thing that you think everybody wants, but really everybody's tired. So let's just all lay down and envision a new world. I don't know, something relaxing and hopeful.
No, I like that. I like you that you said that because I think it's something that it's just right now we're just suddenly starting to actually, work with this. And I really like it. Your self-published poetry collection, Wrecked the Insistence of Grief, tackles a powerful and personal subject. Can you share what inspired you to create this work and how it connects to your broader practice?
Yeah, first of all, I'd never self-published anything, so I really wanted to figure that out. Not sure if I did. It is together, so I guess that's half the battle. So I have been writing about grief since 2017 when my mom was killed in a car accident.
I'm very
And
sorry.
thank you. I decided that the way I was going to work with it is the way I worked with a lot of things. I was going to write about it. And part of my teaching and witchy sort of way is to be incredibly vulnerable and straightforward and just open about most things. And so I started writing about it a lot. And then I decided, after a lot of goading from friends, to put some of it into a book. And so that's how I put it together. But also, a lot of my practice is centered, maybe just wanders around grief, because with all the work I do around love and love spells and Aphrodite and things like that, love is connected to grief. You lose every single thing you ever love, and you cannot escape it. And so it's always there in the background. So I want to offer spaces, hopefully through my writing, that people can see themselves in that and recognize that they're definitely not alone. This is grief is a universal experience, even if it shows up in different ways.
Did you get any feedback from people who read it or that talked to you, or did you go to any readings where people talked about it, gave you feedback on it? How did it impact people?
So I've heard that it was from a couple of folks that it was instrumental in them sort of meeting their grief honestly. And I also had, funny enough, the person who colors my hair, she went through a lot of things, and I gave her one of the books because she'd read some of my poetry. And she said, this is something that is helping me through all of this. And I'm also going to give one to my mom who's going through this too. And hopefully she will see that grief is complicated and messy and also heartbreaking. And I think that in a society that doesn't know how to talk about grief and really doesn't know how to sit with it, those pieces of feedback feel important and feel like maybe I have done my job a little bit.
I like that. You emphasize in your work grounded, graceful, and radically authentic facilitation. Can you expand on what this means to you and how it manifests in your teaching style?
Once upon a time, I was none of those things. I think once upon a time, I'm a fire sign, and so I typically don't like to be grounded. It's not a comfortable place for me. It took me a long time to get there. And I realized,
I totally get that. Thank you for saying that.
It's
Thank
so
you.
true. Like every time we would do grounding in a ritual, I'd be like, oh my gosh, let's get going. I was like, I don't want to do this. And actually, so a little side story for that one. The reason why I realized grounding was important was I was sitting on the bleachers at the spiral dance ritual, this huge ritual that happens in San Francisco every year. Originally was the book launch for Starhawk's book, Spiral Dance. And I was sitting there and I was so tired, and the ritual hadn't even started. We were just setting up an altar. I was exhausted. And someone's like, have you grounded? What? And I realized that I was using all of my energy versus grounding into the present and grounding into the earth and being able to resource myself. So I decided that was maybe a good thing. And it's a balance. It's not a static process, it's dynamic. But so I try to come to my facilitation being grounded in the moment, not grounded in what I think is going to happen, what I want to have happen. Used to be so frustrating when I would first start teaching and things that I would lead wouldn't go a certain way. And I was like, and finally I was like, what if I just meet this moment and just see what arrives and follow that? And part of that came from teaching kids magic, because you can't have a plan. You just got to run and hopefully not lose them. So that's grounded is this moment. Graceful is recognizing that we're all going to make mistakes all the time. And so how do we meet those? And how do we also, give ourselves permission for that? I'm going to say things incorrectly. I'm going to forget things. That's okay. It's part of being human. And radically, was it radically authentic, I think? It is me just being who I am. One of the best pieces of feedback I ever got when I was co-teaching, because in Reclaiming you always teach with another person, was to stop trying to be so perfect. I would try really hard to memorize things, and I still do that. But I was always trying to just be like perfect all the time. And you don't give other people permission to not be.
Yeah.
And so, there has to be, for me at least, there had to be a really radical analysis of vulnerability and how that is not something that is weakness. It is a way to access a conversation with another person as they're delving into something probably really, really vulnerable.
Do you think we put pressure on female pagan authors to be perfect?
Females in general? Or just
Well,
authors?
yeah, I mean females in general, obviously, but like within you think that though within
sometimes
quote unquote the craft, do we put pressure on specifically female authors? I mean, I don't feel like the onus is on male authors that much.
I don't
But
think
definitely
so.
there is on women.
I think that there's definitely, and not just females, but folks of color and non-binary and trans, everybody, there's a higher bar. Like, oh yes, I think maybe because we're on the shoulders of a whole bunch of old white dudes. I don't know. But like, I see it. I see it a lot. I see it in how many people are chosen for conferences. I see in how many books there are by, it's pervasive, but I think it's also cultural, like it's societal. So I don't want to just name it just in the pagan space, but I think that I see it a lot of the time. And it is
I don't want to. I
it's
mean,
an
I don't want to
experience.
I don't want to write a pagan book, but I think I could write one. And if I just had a good photo on the back with shoulder patches on my my blazer, that they would be like, oh, well, that must be he's a guy. He must be knowing. He must know what he's talking about. And it could be complete
Initiated in
shit.
this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, I absolutely think so. Yeah, because there's some folks that are absolutely revered. And I don't have to like everybody. Not everybody has to like me. That's cool.
Right.
And I'm like, why? Just like, why? I don't like, first of all, a lot of folks say the same things, which is understandable because we're all we all have similar things. We just say it differently. But there are some times where I'm like, I don't actually know what you're adding to the conversation.
Yeah. I've heard that many times in the past few months. That's very interesting.
Oh, good. I'm glad I'm on trend.
Yeah, you're very much on trend. I'm not going to name names though, but yeah.
Oh, I'm sure I know.
Many listeners may be curious about exploring magic, but feel unsure about where to start. What advice would you give to beginners or those hesitant to embark on this path?
Yeah, I have lots of answers to this question. But I think one of the main things I would say is that while I still want people to buy books, absolutely, don't rely on just that. One of the best things about magic is getting to play and getting to see nature as something that's even more alive than it is.
Yeah.
So I say have fun. get out and look at things, look at the way that growth is magical. The moon is somehow more magical because it does a thing that it can't help but do. But having fun is one of the things too. And this is the hard one, I think, in the beginning, trusting yourself that you will, that you're doing the right thing in that moment, or that you might have a sense that you need to make a certain choice. Trust that you're going to do it's okay. Please do that. I teach things and say, and you might do something different. That's fine. I'm not you. I don't know what works for you. I don't know if you're dyslexic and your right and your left doesn't really matter, right? And the biggest thing though, don't worry about making mistakes. You're not going to do huge harm. Like I always say, no one's going to die if you don't cast a circle correctly. You're going to be fine. Like it's okay. This doesn't have to be so serious. And just jump in. And even if you make a mistake, this is how we learn anyways. You wouldn't learn something if you don't try. So have fun. Magic is supposed to be fun. So
well, I want to expand on that a little bit, because this is something that's come up with a lot of older pagans. I think that there is a period in your path where you forget about that. Do you? Yeah. And I think we all have done this, I think, but I know I did it, where you just you get so serious that you just completely stop having a good time. Do you think that resonates with you at all?
Oh yeah. I mean, I always tell folks so I'm initiated in the reclaiming tradition, and I always say that, I've fallen in and out of love with it a whole bunch of times because that's part of being in a relationship. I think that you sort of move in and out, but I think it's the same way about awe and wonder. You forget about that sometimes, or at least I've forgotten when I've been so serious about teaching and doing this ritual and learning this thing, and I have to really be serious. And it's like, but do I? I think that my magic expanded and became more, I don't know, more visceral when I stopped trying to make it look a certain way. And I stopped trying to be, I don't know, just, I don't want to say full of myself, but I kind of sort of self-important, I think is a better phrase.
I've gone to a lot of reclaiming events through my life, and I've known a lot of people who are in it, who were in it. It's got a lot of gravitas. Just the name alone, people have heard of it, mostly through magazines or authors. Can you, for those who are not familiar with the term and the name, can you talk a little bit about it and your experience in it and how it kind of intersects your life now?
Yeah. So I first learned about reclaiming in The Spiral Dance by Starhawk. And it was the first witch book that I read that I could see myself in the pages. I was like, oh, I can see myself with these people. And because there was a lot of descriptions of people actually doing rituals and things like that. And we do things a lot differently now. But I was like, oh my gosh, these people can't be real. And then I moved out here. They are. I know a lot of those folks, or have known them. And so here's what I would say that reclaiming is. Reclaiming is an evolving tradition. So when I say this definition now, it's probably going to change, which is great. I came into reclaiming personally in 2008. My then partner was in a class with somebody who was an organizer at California Witch Camp and said, oh, your wife should go. And then I went to California Witch Camp, and here I am. So reclaiming started to grow through that, very interesting time of the 70s where, the goddess spirituality was coming in, human potential movement, the anti-nuke movement, a whole bunch of activism in that time. And in the Bay Area, a lot of folks were, all involved in that and sort of had these sort of overlapping groups. And Starhawk, decided to, wrote this book, and it started through her dissertation. And she wrote this book and started to have folks come to her and sort of be like, oh, how can I create rituals for myself? And that became the first class, which is Elements of Magic. And so basically, the easy way to tell the story, because it's really convoluted and a lot of folks have different ideas about it. So I always tread a little carefully with this because there are many different folks. Is that so then more classes sort of sprung up, because of course when you learn one thing you want to learn more, and we went from Elements of Magic, Iron Pentacle, Pearl Pentacle, Rites of Passage. We have another core class now, But all of that happened. And there was this group in the Bay Area that was sort of like in charge, even though we're non-hierarchical. I don't know if we'd said that at that point, but there was this collective, and it was called the Collective. And you'll usually find that still online as being something that still exists. It does not, because folks were not happy that it existed, because it was too centralized. And so through a series of events, which I will say very circumspectly, I wrote about in a book that's not out yet. So,
nice.
So it's coming, at least a part of it. So basically, the collective dissolved, and people before then created this thing called the Principles of Unity, which is the thing by which you can call yourself a reclaiming witch. If you agree to these things, great, come on board. And that has also changed. In the time that I've been in reclaiming, it's changed 2 times. It's been updated. So basically, reclaiming is all over the world at this point. There are communities in North America, South America, Australia, Europe. I don't know if there's a community in Asia, but there's some folks in Asia. And basically, the collective, dissolved so that reclaiming had sort of spread all over the place without having to be so centralized. And it's really focused on activism, personal development. And it's different for every person, because we don't have like here are the deities that we work with, and here's the stuff that we do. We have a lot of things that are pretty consistent. Yeah. But I wouldn't say, like I always say, sometimes, but not always in reclaiming, when I teach things. Like it's a fairly standard ritual structure from what I understand, but it's magic, it's spell work, it's a whole bunch of things, because there's a whole bunch of people in it. But if you're interested in, I did write a book on reclaiming witchcraft to sort of give the nitty gritty that wasn't in spiral dance, at least because I don't think a lot of that stuff existed. And then another one, book called Honoring the Wild, where I collected stories from activists and rituals and things like that, and also the timeline of activism in reclaiming. So it's pretty fascinating. I learn something new all the time.
Will these books be out this year, or are you
They're
going to
out? They're out.
Oh, they're out currently.
I've written a bunch of books. Yeah, okay. I have trouble keeping track of them. So Reclaiming was the first book I wrote, Reclaiming Witchcraft. It's a Pagan Portals. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Story. So my very first one, I decided to write about my tradition.
What's next for you writing wise? What are you working on now?
Yeah, so my next book that's out is Artemis, and it's out April 1st. And then after that, Circe comes out in November of 2024. I have finished Hestia. I don't know when she's going to be out, but she's done. Yeah, so probably, I don't know, next year. Next year. And then after that, so things are in process of being written. I'm working on a book on the Greek pantheon, and that's through Moon Books still. And then the next one after that is a Pagan Portals on the Muses, and then a Pagan Portals on Hecate.
Wow, so, very nice.
Yeah, Hecate is going to be number 13. I'm very excited.
Very cool. Well, Irisanya, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to you, and I want to encourage people. We'll have links to some of your books and website online, and we'll put that in the bio. So thank you very much for being on the podcast. I love getting a chance to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk with you too, and to get to see your cat for a second.
Oh yeah, he's being a little terror. That wraps up our conversation with Irisanya Moon. A huge thank you to Irisanya for sharing their wisdom and passion with us today. For listeners who want to delve deeper, you can find Irisanya's books, including the Pagan Portals series and Wrecked, The Insistence of Grief, online at your favorite bookstore. Links will be in the show notes as well. Remembering magic lives within you too. Keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep cultivating your own heart magic. Until next time, this is Dean Jones signing off for the Calling the Quarters podcast.